Today I want to talk about getting into some gridding using charcoal, in this case a neutral color background. Gridding is a really important part of any kind of hyperrealism you're seeing online or other places. You need to grid out, inch by inch or half inch by half inch boxes, depending on what you want to do. Um, that was just a little pause there to show you how I'm working inside of each grid. I'm using a an isolation box or a cutout of an inch grid so that I can look over each piece carefully and draw them a piece at a time. It's that old adage, like, how do you eat an elephant? Well, you don't. You go to jail, that's poaching. But if you were to have to, right? Like, you eat it one bite at a time. And one bite at a time means that you're taking one square at a time. The advantage, of course, is that you don't have to worry so much about proportion. You're just drawing things as you see, as you go. And when you isolate it down to one square, you can get pretty detailed. So all of this is going time lapse, and it's very fast. It's not easy to see all of the process of how I'm doing this since it's a pretty big project, but I take a good quality black and white photo. I make sure that I got grid squares that work for the size of paper that I'm using. If your picture's smaller, then you can go a half inch on your grid to your picture to a full inch on your paper, or you can go half inch to half inch if you want to make a smaller piece, or a full inch to full inch if you want to get into those hyperrealism and details. Now, this isn't what I would call hyperrealism, but it's getting closer there. And so a lot of times when you're seeing time lapses online, they're not showing you the grid. I intentionally drew my grids a little bit darker so that you can actually see them. And that's not what you really want to do. You really want to use just the pressure of the pencil, the weight of the pencil to draw those grid lines so that they don't show up when you're filling them in, whether it's with graphite or charcoal or paint or colored pencil. If you press too hard on your grid line, they will show up in your image. And so that is a weirdly intentional mistake that I made in order for you to see that come out a little better, or see that grid process as I'm doing the charcoal or adding the charcoal in. The nice part about working on neutral tone paper is that there's a lot of shading you don't have to do. You can leave those neutrals neutral, right? Just leave that gray, that mid-tone already there. And then you're just adding in the brightest spots and the darkest spots. And it takes a very fast three-dimensional form when you do that. I think that left unaided, when you're working with charcoal at first, it just turns into a giant mess. But if you're using a blending stub and a neutral tone sheet of paper, or even working, white charcoal on black paper, that process is easier than you think. You're able to very quickly develop things that look three-dimensional. So whenever you see this kind of work online, and it looks like the artist is just some sort of amazing, they're doing this first pass, most of the time it's because their grid lines are hidden, or they've pre-drawn it and the white balance on the camera doesn't pick up the pre-drawing. So all they're focused on is the shading. And when you're just focused on the shading, it's amazing what you can do. The other newbie mistake that a lot of people make is they don't keep their reference right in front of you. Keep your reference in front of you at all times. You need to be constantly looking at what you're drawing. Too many people try and focus on their memory. So here's, there's savants that can do that, but when you're starting out, don't try to rely on your memory. Use your reference photos. Use a little grid to get you going. And a lot of times people use a grid once and they just magically become better because it teaches you that process of isolation and to take one thing at a time, which is the key to successful art. I've done a creative background just because, self-portraits can become very boring. I added an interesting expression to the face. Self-portraits aren't about narcissism. They're about self-reflection and understanding yourself in an objective way. Whether they're serious or goofy like this, it's important to understand this is an ancient process. Self-portraits go back all the way to, the cave paintings and leaving, handprints on the wall after blowing berry fat and blood on your handprint, leaving on that cave wall. It's about identity and about understanding oneself and leaving a mark. And it's okay to engage in that process. It's an ancient rite of passage. It's not narcissism. It's understanding yourself a little better. So here is, my final product on it. Everything from the fabric and the cloth to these individual hairs. They seem overwhelming, but remember that I only had to mentally focus on one square at a time, so it helped it turn out the way I wanted. Um, the more time you spend, obviously, the more realistic you can get. I was pretty happy with the teeth and the gross beard I was sporting, but there you go. I want you to not be afraid of charcoal or using um, neutral paper or doing self portraits. Give it a try. Thanks.